Hey everyone, in this video we'll be going over how to lay out your PCB. So after opening this new window, we'll go to Tools, Update PCB from Schematic, and after updating the PCB, we'll close this window. We should now be able to zoom in to our schematic, adjusting our grid accordingly, and we just make sure that we have the right tool set enabled for this. Make sure that we're in inches, not millimeters. From here, let's go to Board Setup. From here, we want to set our preset layer groupings to 2 layers, parts on front in the layers page. Once we've done this, we can go ahead and orient and move our components as needed. We can move around the entire schematic at first, but then we should start moving around single components to clean up the rat's nest that we might have. So as you can see, these white lines kind of define how we're going to have to set up traces later. So we can move parts around, we can rotate them, we can change their orientation, and this is one of the best ways to clear this rat's nest. So you can think of this as a sort of game. Go ahead and organize them. As you can see here, it's more of just playing around to have no overlapping white lines. So try your best to do this. I've always found it easier to work with larger parts first and then work with the smaller parts around them. Rotating will be very helpful for you during this, and as possible, try to keep as much straight lines. As you can see that it's not always necessary, but it always makes things look cleaner, especially later on. So you can see we just enabled and disabled layers on the right. What we just disabled was labels, so this just looks more cleaner. As you can tell, you can toggle this on and off, and this just makes it simpler and cleaner on your screen. So once you're satisfied with your schematic, go ahead and reduce your grid size and adjust your track accordingly. Now we can start laying down traces. So go ahead on the right and click the trace button, and you can begin adding in your traces. You can see that we have more instructions about what buttons to click in terms of keyboard shortcuts for laying down traces, as well as how to toggle between different layers. Once you've laid down a trace, you can actually adjust it accordingly. We can continue laying down traces, connecting white lines as we see them fit. We try not to cross anything over so you can clean them up as you go. And here we'll fast forward through some of the traces, not to bore you or anything, but feel free to just watch and see how we're able to kind of organize everything as we go. So as you can see here, we found ourselves with a little problem. This one trace that we need to connect is sort of in the middle of everywhere and is hard to overlap with anything. So what we can do is actually go into a different layer. So as you can see, now our trace has turned green, which means that we are on a different layer, meaning that we can overlap any of our current red traces without any problem. This makes it easier when we have more complicated boards and we're no longer restricted by one layer. Once you're done laying down your traces, go ahead and adjust the grid accordingly, and we are going to begin doing our pours. On the right-hand toolbar, we'll select the option that is for Add in Filled Zones, and we're going to select a ground plane. Don't forget to constrain your outline to 45 degrees. So we can now begin drawing our polygon. This will take the shape of our ground plane. We want to make sure that it encompasses all of our parts and our traces, and make sure that we have some extra space towards the edges. Like we did previously, we can also toggle this layer of our ground plane. So as you can see, our edges of our traces are a bit close to the edges of our ground plane. So we can go in and actually change these traces and move them in a bit. On the right, we can select the plane that our traces are on and actually click on our traces and move them in. Once we've made our final adjustments, we can go ahead and finish our next plane. We can draw another polygon the same way that we did before, but first let's make sure to adjust our grid. So drawing our polygon, let's make sure that we constrain our outline. We also want a ground plane, and let's continue. We can continue tracing our same path that we've taken last time, and create the same exact polygon and fill it in. Now we can see the finalized ground planes. There are two, both green and red, and we can see all the different ground pins of the different components that we have on our board. Some of them are highlighted in red, while others are highlighted in green. Now we can kind of see that the edges of our tracers are still a bit close to the edges of our ground plane. So we can go ahead and continue to make some more changes, pushing them in just a bit. It's always better to be safe than sorry. And we can also move around any other components that we feel necessary. Do make sure that when you move around your components, you also adjust the traces accordingly, as they do not move alongside your components. Any extra traces that have been drawn should also be cleared, as they will not delete automatically. So what we want to do now is add the edge cuts for the board. These are the physical boundaries for our board. You can find them on the right, but let's first change our grid accordingly. Using the same tool as before, we can draw our edge cuts. It's important to make sure that all of your edge cuts stay within the ground polygons. We're almost done. One of our last steps is to add vias. On the right hand side, you can see we have an option to add vias. Go ahead and place them down on the board. Make sure not to lay them on top of any traces or other components. We use vias to connect the top ground plane to the bottom. A good amount is 1 via per ground island. To add some finishing touches to our PCB, select the silkscreen layer on the right, and then go ahead and add some text to your PCB. In this example, we'll just be writing IEEE Hope on our PCB. From here, go to View, Contrast Mode, and select High Contrast Mode. You can now see your PCB in a different setting. You can also toggle your different layers and see what all these different layers are for. Once you're finished, go to Inspect, Design Rules Checker, and here you will be able to run your DRC. KiCad will now warn you if there are any errors on your board, and you can take this time to correct your design and rerun DRC until there are no more violations. You can also use List Unconnected to see any unconnected traces on your board. And with that, we're officially done. Go to View and choose 3D Viewer. This will show your PCB in a 3D format.